Good evening, I'm Judy Woodruff. On the NewsHour tonight.
Never again!
Survivors of the Florida school shooting and thousands of others demand change to the nation's gun laws as President Trump holds a meeting on school safety. Then a city in Scotland reflects on the school shooting that shook its community more than 20 years ago and what it could teach the U.S. about stopping gun violence.
You can never say never, but I think we've done an awful lot in this country to make our schools much safer places, and I don't go out the door with the worries that some American parents undoubtedly have today.
Plus, what freely available open source data and satellite images can tell us about the true power of North Korea's nuclear arsenal. All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour. Calls for action after the school shooting in Florida. In Tallahassee and around the country today, students and supporters appealed for an end to the bloodshed. William Brangham begins our coverage.
What do we want?
Change!
When we want it?
Now!
The chants began as soon as about 100 of the school shooting survivors arrived at the Florida State Capitol in Tallahassee today.
Never again! Never again!
From there, they moved inside to lobby the Republican-run legislature for stronger gun control.
Please, I beg and I demand that every single person in power who has the ability to change the fear that kids feel going back to school, that they do something.
No longer can you take money from the NRA. No longer can you fly under the radar doing whatever it is that you want to do. Because we are coming after you. We are coming after every single one of you and demanding that you take action, demanding that you make a change.
The crowds outside the Capitol grew to thousands for a midday rally. There they heard an outpouring of anger and grief over the killing of 17 at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School 1 week ago today.
How many more innocent people have to die before we make a change? A change is overdue. And we are the change. When children act like leaders and leaders act like children, you know something is about to change.
These student activists had traveled more than 400 miles from Parkland in South Florida to press for a range of solutions. One student called for a ban on semi-automatic weapons like the AR-15 rifle used in the massacre.
The only purpose of an assault weapon like this is to kill, and to kill as many people as possible. The AR-15 is not a self-defense weapon. It is rightly so called an assault weapon.
A day earlier, the Florida State House voted against taking up a bill to ban assault weapons. Today, the Democrat who called for that bill to be debated made an impassioned plea for the students to keep up their fight.
You are the cavalry we've been waiting for. So to you, let's do it.
Across the country, thousands of students heeded that call, walking out of classes and chanting slogans demanding tougher gun control. In Washington, D.C., hundreds massed outside the U.S. Capitol and the White House. Inside the executive mansion, President Trump held a listening session with high school students and teachers. Among them, some who survived the Parkland attack, as well as others from school shootings at Newtown, Connecticut in 2012 and at Columbine High School in Colorado in 1999.
We're going to be very strong on background checks. We'll be doing very strong background checks, very strong emphasis on the mental health of somebody.
The president heard emotional appeals from both students and parents in the group.
How is it that easy to buy this type of weapon? How do we not stop this after Columbine, after Sandy Hook?
There should have been one school shooting, and we should have fixed it. And I'm pissed, because my daughter I'm not going to see again.
Until now, the president has been a staunch supporter of gun rights. Last year, he signed a law that eliminated an Obama-era regulation which made it harder for some mentally ill people to get guns. The rule said that anyone receiving Social Security benefits from mental illness and who had also been ruled incapable of handling their own finances would be blocked from purchasing weapons. The president signed the law, reversing that rule last February. Mr. Trump has also repeatedly maintained his allegiance to the National Rifle Association. Last April, he addressed the NRA's leadership forum in Atlanta.
You came through for me, and I am going to come through for you.
The Center for Responsive Politics estimates that during the 2016 election, the NRA spent $30 million to support Mr. Trump and oppose Hillary Clinton. During one of the presidential debates, candidate Trump argued that strict gun laws don't actually reduce gun violence.
In Chicago, which has the toughest gun laws in the United States, probably you could say by far, they have more gun violence than any other city.
But yesterday, amid the outcry over Parkland, the president appeared to soften his stance.
Just a few moments ago, I signed a memorandum directing the Attorney General to propose regulations to ban all devices that turn legal weapons into machine guns.
Democrats like Senator Dianne Feinstein of California urged the president to support her legislation banning bump stocks and to encourage his fellow Republicans to stop blocking it. White House spokeswoman Sarah Sanders also said the president is open to improving federal background checks and possibly setting a minimum age for buying AR-15 type rifles. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm William Brangham.
The president also said today that letting trained school workers carry weapons might make attackers think twice and, in his words, solve the problem. We'll return to all of this after the news summary. In the day's other news, President Trump charged again that President Obama should have done more about Russian meddling in the 2016 election. He also questioned why his Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, is not investigating Democrats. Meanwhile, House and Senate Democratic leaders Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer call for giving the FBI $300 million to fight any meddling in this year's midterm elections. Cities and towns across the nation's midsection face severe flooding today from heavy rain and melting snow. Rivers overflowed in Michigan, Indiana, and parts of Illinois, submerging roads and neighborhoods. In Goshen, Indiana, overnight, crews used boats to rescue people from their homes. And in Arkansas, a school bus had to be abandoned today and a dozen students rescued. In Syria, the carnage raged on in a major assault on rebel-held suburbs east of Damascus. Human rights monitors now say more than 300 people have been killed just since Sunday, and doctors say they are overwhelmed. Government airstrikes and artillery are blasting the area, and humanitarian groups warn today it's a catastrophe in the making.
People are terrified. We know that many are seeking shelter in basements and in dug-out makeshift shelters. We know that children are facing the brunt of this crisis, and we're very, very worried for the safety of everyone.
Meanwhile, in the north of Syria, Turkey vowed again to continue its offensive against Syrian Kurdish fighters around Afrin. It also repeated a warning that it will attack fighters allied with Syria's government if they try to aid the Kurds. New details today on the deadly wreck of an Amtrak train that carried dozens of Republican congressmen. The train slammed into a garbage truck on tracks in rural Virginia last month. Now, the National Transportation Safety Board says the truck had tried to cross after the safety gates came down. One of the workers on the truck was killed in the crash. The president's eldest son is rejecting criticism that he is profiting from his father being in office. Donald Trump Jr. is on a week-long business trip to India that has raised conflict of interest questions. But he told India's CNBC affiliate that his family is actually missing out on opportunities.
When people talk about it these days, it's, profiteering from the presidency and all this nonsense. It's like, wait a minute, I can't do deals. I've spent over a decade creating relationships. We could do so many more, and we're not doing those, but no one wants to talk about those kind of deals. It's sort of a shame because we put on these impositions on ourselves, but essentially got no credit for actually doing that and for doing the right thing.
The president's son is marketing Trump brand luxury homes in India. As president-elect, the elder Trump had pledged that his real estate business would conduct no new deals while in office. Questions today about whether First Lady Melania Trump sponsored her parents for legal resident status in the United States. It is a process that President Trump has condemned as, quote, chain migration. The Washington Post reports that the Slovenian nationals have their green cards and will soon become U.S. citizens. The report quotes immigration experts as saying that Mrs. Trump's sponsorship appears to be, quote, the only reasonable way that can happen. On Wall Street today, stocks swooned late after minutes from the Federal Reserve Board's latest meeting signal more interest rate hikes. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost nearly 167 points to close at 24,797. The Nasdaq fell 16 points, and the S&P 500 slipped almost 15. And at the Winter Olympics in South Korea, an important day for American skiers. Jessica Diggins won the first U.S. gold medal ever in cross-country skiing, and Lindsey Vonn took bronze in the women's downhill. At 33, she is the oldest woman ever to medal in alpine skiing. Still to come on the NewsHour, the backlash Parkland, Florida students are facing for speaking out about gun laws. How Scotland tackled gun violence after a school shooting in the 1990s. Remembering the life and legacy of Billy Graham, plus much more. As we said at the beginning of the program, student-led rallies have picked up a momentum of their own in Florida and around the country, in large part out of anger over the easy availability of assault-style weapons and other kinds of guns. There were rallies here in Washington as well today, in front of the White House and another near the Capitol. Two students who took part in the rallies after a walkout from their schools join me now. Camille Richter is a senior at McLean High School in McLean, Virginia. And Jake Bennett is a senior at H.B. Woodlawn Secondary School in Arlington, Virginia. And thank you to both of you for coming out here to the studio to talk to us. Jake, I'm going to start with you. You were just telling me something like 5 miles from your school all the way to the White House today from Arlington into D.C. Why did you want to be part of this today?
Because we live so close to D.C. We felt that it wouldn't be the same if we just walked outside, if we just walked to a courthouse, which is where our public school headquarters are. We felt driven to march to the White House and to really show that we would go this far to voice our discontent and our anger with Congress.
And Camille, why is this so important to you?
You know, I'm sick of going to school every day, being scared for my life and being scared for my friends' lives. We live in a relatively safe part of Virginia, at least I do, in McLean. And it's silly that we live in a first world country and still, first graders, second graders, like young kids all through high schoolers are afraid of going to school and they're afraid of what's going to happen to them. It's not right and it really needs to stop.
Jake, you were saying that you feel strongly that something has to be done. Do you have an idea right now of what do you think it should be?
I think that universal background checks need to be implemented to buy a gun. And I think that we should ban assault rifles again. They were banned for 10 years, and that really did work. There's no need for American civilians to have a machine of war. They're not used for hunting or protection. They're used for murder. And I think that those are 2 steps in the right direction. Background checks are very fast. They take 2 minutes. And they would really save a lot of lives, in my opinion.
And yet a lot of people, as you know, Camille, because we haven't had that legislation since it was allowed to expire, argue that people should be allowed to buy pretty much any kind of gun they want.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Growing up, we live in Virginia. We have a rule that's you can only buy 1 gun a month, which for us in Virginia, people have complained is too restrictive for guns. And I have a lot of family from Wisconsin, hunters. I've been around guns for a long time. I know what it's like. You shoot a gun, you live in Virginia. It's a pretty regular thing, but there's a difference between a hunting rifle and an assault rifle. There's a difference between military-grade weaponry and weaponry it could be perceived as be part of American culture with hunting. It's unnecessary. It's blatantly unnecessary.
Jake, you mentioned the assault weapons, and I know one of the ideas that's being discussed today is putting an age limit on who can buy an AR-15 or another assault weapon. Would something like that, do you think, be acceptable?
I think that part of that would be acceptable. I think that an age limit should be implemented, but other restrictions should be added onto it. I really don't believe that anyone needs an AR-15 or other assault weapons. They don't serve any purpose except for massacre. It's what the shooters at Sandy Hook in Newtown used, in Orlando, and now at Stoneman Douglas.
Right.
It's unnecessary.
Camille, there's also been a proposal that there be more guns in schools to protect students, that teachers or others be trained and armed to protect students.
I think it's expensive and unnecessary. How much money does it cost to give every teacher and potentially students the training and the weaponry that they need in order to protect themselves? It feels like there's an easier solution to the problem that people and lawmakers are kind of avoiding.
Jake, do you feel like you're getting through? I know you all were just watching some of the discussion inside the White House. President Trump invited students and some parents who've been through these tragedies and educators. Do you feel like the message is getting through to the people who can make a difference?
The messages that the Florida students are sending, that we were sending, what students all across America are sending, parents, teachers, everyday people are trying to send to Congress and to the president, are that Congress needs to stop saying yes to the NRA and start saying yes to the American children and to the safety in schools. I think that's the message that we were trying to send. I think that what we did today was set forward a motion that will keep, it will keep building momentum until it does make a change.
What about that, Camille? Because there have been school shootings before, there have been protests before, but it hasn't lasted, or there have been a little bit of change, but not the change. These things keep happening.
Right. It's just, we elected Congress to be the representatives of the people, not to be the representatives of big lobby firms and of the NRA. And it feels like when our legislature and when our representatives ignore the epidemic of shootings that are going on across the U.S., it makes you wonder, who are they working for? You want to be represented. You want your voice to be heard. So.
And somebody say, well, these young people feel strongly, but they're just high school students.
Right.
How much difference can they really make?
I think we can make a huge difference. There's been some talk from some representatives that, the high school students who are making a stand in Florida are plants by the FBI, or they're paid to do this, and it's absolutely ridiculous. Again, like we were saying earlier, if you're 18, men are old enough to be drafted. At 16, at least in Virginia, you can buy a car, which is dangerous within itself. Why can you buy a gun? Like, it's just, you can do these things, it doesn't make sense. We have a voice, and we're clearly, able enough to use it. We know what we're talking about to an extent, but.
Jake, do you feel that you and your friends are committed to stick with this issue?
Absolutely. We are committed to keep doing whatever is necessary to affect change, whether it's rallies, protests, whatever it takes. Really reaching out to people online. It's not going to be just us that affects this change. It's going to be high schoolers all across America who does.
Well, I know you've managed to get the attention of a lot of people. Jake Bennett, Camille Richter, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we get a teacher's perspective. Mike Conrad says the issue of school shootings has come up repeatedly in his own classroom. He teaches video production at Royal Oak High School outside Detroit, Michigan. And he joins me now from there. Mike Conrad, welcome to the program. You were able to listen to these two students we were speaking with. What did you make of what they had to say?
Well, I applaud them for everything they had to say. The students, not only Camille and Jake, but the students around the country are taking a stand, and they're using the right language, they're using the right vocabulary. They are fed up, and it's time for them to help make change. So I applaud the fact that they went to the rally today. I enjoyed hearing their thoughts, and I agree with them.
You were telling us that your own students are speaking up. What are they saying about the shooting in Florida?
There's a lot of discussion. The discussion tone has changed in the past couple of days. Students are scared. I can give you an example that daily, just a generic PA announcement throughout the school, when that tone goes off, the tension heightens, and you hear a student gasp, or you hear a student say with fear, "Oh no," because they don't know what that announcement's going to say. That shouldn't happen in a classroom. There are students who are asking me how I'm prepared to defend them should a shooter come into the school. It's a difficult question to answer because I can talk about all of our drills, all of our lockdowns. I can talk about everything that we do as a school district and what I do in terms of my own knowledge. But at the end of the day, how do you prepare yourself for one of these situations that happened in Florida?
Well, what is your thinking about teachers being armed, teachers being trained? It came up just this afternoon at the White House. The president raised it with the students and teachers and parents who he was meeting with. What do you think of that idea?
I think that the moment that you put a gun on the hip of a teacher in a classroom, that we have accepted the norm that school shootings will not stop, that we are now on the front line to defend against them instead of trying to find a way to stop them. I look at a classroom as a safe environment, and I never look at it when I say that to students or to parents that a safe environment in a classroom means defending against shootings. What I look at is a place where a student can come talk to me, where a student can come bring their problems to me. When they know that one of their friends might go home this weekend and harm themselves and not come back on Monday, and they come to me and tell me that, I know that they trust me, that they can come and say those things to me. That's a safe environment. The second I put a gun on my hip, I don't think that that relationship continues.
If it's not arming teachers, then what are some solutions, do you think? What's the role that teachers can play to keep students safe and themselves?
Well, I think some of it is education and awareness. I think that Camille and Jake did a great job of explaining some of the things that have to happen prior to the point where a shooter ever walks into a school. Teachers should not be a line of defense. The point should never get to the point where they're asked to do so. So I think we as teachers, I teach high school students, 15, 16, 17, 18-year-old students. I should be preparing them to make those decisions to go out and vote, to call their legislators, to march should they want to. But I think my job as a teacher is to inspire and to educate, and I think that's the best thing that we can do at that point in a classroom, not make it a military zone.
Mike Conrad is a teacher at Royal Oak High School near Detroit. Thank you very much. We turn now to a darker side of the response to the Parkland shooting, something one of the students mentioned a moment ago. Hari Srinivasan explores the lies and conspiracy theories that are cropping up online.
Our entire nation is praying for the victims and their families.
The immediate response to the school shooting in Florida was a wave of prayers and condolences from around the country.
Our first thoughts are with the families of those who were lost.
What quickly followed? A flood of allegations and conspiracy theories about the students calling for gun reform.
I just know that we are being fed something as phony as a $3 bill.
Right-wing outlets like Gateway Pundit and InfoWars and online trolls are promoting the false theory that some of the Parkland teens are actually paid actors.
This is not acceptable.
The target of many of these attacks is Stoneman Douglas senior David Hogg. He has been called an FBI plant who was coached by his father and a crisis actor after video surfaced of a California CBS story featuring Hogg from August.
These people saying this is absolutely disturbing, and I'm not an actor in any sense, way, shape, or form. I'm somebody that had to witness this and live through this.
Many of these false accounts came from extreme fringes of social media, but are now being amplified by better-known voices. Conservative writer Dinesh D'Souza tweeted that one of the students interviewed by a British news program seemed coached, and the president's son, Donald Trump Jr., has liked some of these conspiracy tweets. But on Tuesday, Florida Senator Marco Rubio tweeted the accusations against the students are, quote, the work of a disgusting group of idiots with no sense of decency.
This is what our country has become.
Other Republicans stayed away from conspiracy theories about the students, instead accusing Democrats and gun control advocates of using the students to push their agenda. former Georgia Congressman Jack Kingston.
Their sorrow can very easily be hijacked by left-wing groups
But do you think
who have an agenda. Well, let's ask ourselves, do we really think that, and I say this sincerely, do we really think 17-year-olds on their own are going to plan a nationwide rally?
Fox News anchor Tucker Carlson.
But all of a sudden you're seeing these kids involved in calls for very specific pieces of legislation. And the allegation has been that they are in some way in contact with organized anti-gun groups, and people who have suggested that have been denounced as immoral and heartless, and how dare you question these kids or attack them, which, for the record, I am certainly not doing.
Right.
But I think it raises interesting questions about how we make our law.
Stoneman Douglas students are pushing back against the attacks and criticisms. I interviewed Ryan Deitch over the weekend.
I, for one, just think, ignore it, first off, because these people are not taking action. We're taking action, and I don't care what a troll says. They're just hiding behind a computer. We're out there on the streets.
We start fighting.
Despite all the criticisms and false accusations, students still plan to march for gun control next month in Washington and around the country. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Hari Srinivasan.
And now the view from a Scottish town that knows the horror of gun violence firsthand. Many in Dunblane, Scotland, have pledged their support to student activists from Florida and beyond. Britain outlawed handgun ownership after a massacre at Dunblane Primary School in 1996. Many in the town have become frustrated by American attitudes toward gun control. But as special correspondent Malcolm Brabant reports, for the first time in years, some Scots now see reasons for optimism.
In Dunblane, a spring flower is in bloom, the snowdrop. It's especially poignant for Alice Doherty. She lost 16 of her friends and a teacher in Britain's deadliest mass shooting. Alice, a waitress in her mother's tea shop, has a tattoo immortalising the Snowdrop campaign, a parents' movement which led to a nationwide ban on private ownership of handguns.
Once was enough. It didn't need to happen again.
After last week's massacre in Florida, she wishes America would finally learn the lessons of Dunblane.
You'd rather listen to the sound of guns than the sound of children laughing. Is that what you're saying? Like, their lives are no longer important. It's all about money. It's all about people's right to bear arms. And I don't think people's right to bear arms is stronger than people's right to have an education and feel safe, and their right to have a life.
Alice's mother, Nora, was a member of the school oversight board. 3 of her children were pupils. They all survived. Like many in Dunblane, she's become frustrated at the unending cycle of school shootings in America and the lack of action on gun control.
Your first reaction is, oh, it's another one, and that's ridiculous. And those are 2 wrong responses you should have to human lives being lost due to guns. But that's what it's become. The rest of the world is looking at America and thinking, why? Why are you allowing Americans to shoot Americans? It doesn't make sense.
At Dunblane Cathedral this past weekend, the congregation prayed that America would have a deep and sober reflection on its gun laws, and that prayer would move beyond sentiment and words to a deep, growing and active resolve for change. That's a sentiment shared by Mick North, whose only child, Sophie, was killed at Dunblane. He is exasperated by America's gun laws.
At the moment, they are plainly insane. Anything that's a gun has the support of the NRA for being available to any citizen of the USA. I mean, that is ridiculous. You have kids, teenagers, being able to buy military-style weapons and use them with the devastating effect that we saw last week.
Martin with a police helmet on. That must have been quite early on.
Former Dunblane pupil Malcolm Robertson is particularly aggrieved by what he sees as the failure of American politicians to protect children. He's from a political family. His father George was Britain's Defence Secretary and later the NATO Secretary General. Robertson recalls Thomas Hamilton, the Dunblane shooter, arguing with his father over a grievance, years before Hamilton's anger morphed into carnage.
I've got 3 children, 3 boys. I'm pretty confident that they're safe. I mean, you can never say never, but I think we've done an awful lot in this country to make our schools much safer places, and I don't go out the door with the worries that some American parents undoubtedly have today.
Here is a statistic that highlights the difference between Scotland and the United States. Last year, in Scotland, with its population of 5.2 million people, there were 2 people who were shot dead. If that crime rate was applied to the United States, with its population of more than 320 million people, there would have been 124 gun-related murders. According to the Gun Violence Archive, the number of people shot dead in the United States in 2017 was nearly 16,000. That translates to every single person in Dunblane, which has 9,000 residents, plus 7,000 people elsewhere. John Carnacan helped to make Scotland safer. A former senior detective, he ran the pioneering Violence Reduction Unit, which eradicated Glasgow's reputation as Europe's murder capital by targeting all forms of violent behaviour.
Start where you are, do what you can. And that'll make a difference. You'll start to move towards it then. If we wait until we've got a great big plan, I suppose, it's never going to happen. If we wait until we have some leader who rides over the hill and says, right, we're going to fix this firearm stuff, you're going to be waiting a long time. It's not going to happen. Change starts at an individual level. That's how systems change. That's how we changed it. And that's what we did here in Scotland. It doesn't matter where you start, you will make a difference. And in public health terms, don't make it worse. So I think by reducing access to children to assault rifles, that's a start.
At the Tilly Tea Room, the sense of frustration with America is being replaced by cautious optimism.
I feel there is a change momentum. I watched a wonderful speech by Emma Gonzalez, I think is her name.
If the president wants to come up to me and tell me to my face that it was a terrible tragedy and how it should never have happened, and maintain telling us how nothing is going to be done about it, I'm going to happily ask him how much money he received from the National Rifle Association.
That young person that I heard speak was the most honest, articulate speech I have heard. And I felt really, I feel there is a chance that if they hold on to what she said and people get behind her, at last they can change the corruption from the NRA and the government.
Sophie North's bereaved father also feels uplifted by what he sees as the inspirational voices emerging from Florida.
Keep on talking. Keep on using whatever means you have to publicise your feelings on this. Social media, I hear marches, even walkouts from school. Make sure it stays in everybody's mind. Tell people how it's affected you. Don't let the powers that be divide and rule. Make sure that the average American citizen knows exactly how this impacts on the average American kid.
In Dunblane, they believe the ballot box is the best way to counter the torrent of political donations and lobbying flowing from the gun industry.
You change it by identifying those people that you can trust in power, by electing those people you can trust in power who will make a difference. These young people who are starting this need to continue doing it. We need to get behind them. That notion that never underestimate that a small group of people can change the world, because that's usually the way it happens anyway.
Children of love, cover your ears, the bad man is coming.
Emily Barr plays her song about gun violence in the music room at the Dunblane Centre. It's a playground, a meeting place, a theatre, a sports hall. But above all, it's a symbol of Dunblane's rebirth and determination to live. The victims are memorialised in window engravings. There are snowdrops and other images that represent the children. Sophie North's motif is her cat. Generous donations from Americans help to build this place. In return, Dunblane offers its wisdom.
My words to the Americans would be to just see where Scotland, see where the UK has come from taking those actions and just moving forward and just saying no more.
And I would like to think that we could support America now in trying to change their gun laws and make America safe.
The view from the tea room is one of tranquility and safety. Alice Doherty is 27. That's the age her friends would have been. She's never visited America because of its gun culture.
We got rid of guns, and there were people who would have liked guns before, but their lives haven't changed that much. Nobody walks around miserable because they don't own a gun.
The people of Dunblane are weary of being defined by tragedy, which is reinforced every time there's a shooting in America. When, they wonder, will America heed the lesson of the snowdrops? For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Malcolm Brabant in Dunblane.
The Trump administration confirmed last night that Vice President Pence was scheduled to meet secretly with top North Korean officials during his recent trip to South Korea. North Korean officials pulled out of the meeting at the last minute. It would have come after Pence sat near Kim Jong-un's sister during the Olympics opening ceremony. The Trump White House considers North Korea's nuclear and missile programs the main threat to American national security. Last week, Miles O'Brien examined the North's ability to make the material required for nuclear weapons. Tonight, Miles looks at what we know of the devices themselves and how analysts gauge North Korea's building progress. It's for our weekly series on the leading edge of science.
North Korea has tested nuclear weapons 6 times since 2006 at this mountainous site in Punggye-ri. No one from the outside has witnessed such a test, but the experts believe this propaganda movie produced by the regime offers an accurate, albeit embellished, version of what happens inside. But how much is known about the design and size of this secret arsenal?
This is actually a 3D model of North Korea's nuclear test site.
Jeffrey Lewis is director of the East Asian Non-Proliferation Program at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey.
So these black spheres are actually the estimated size of the cavities from North Korea's nuclear explosions.
He and his team used terrain data gathered by satellites to build a 3D computer model of the Punggye-ri test site.
We estimated where the nuclear explosions had occurred. We were able to use satellite photographs to see where the tunnels went into the mountains. And when we finished that, one of the things we realized is that that site could accommodate a much larger nuclear explosion than we had seen in the past.
It led him and his team to predict the North Koreans would soon test a bomb with a few hundred kiloton yield, much larger than their previous tests. The prediction came at the beginning of 2017. In September, seismometers detected an explosion about that big. Even when testing occurs underground, some gases can leak out. The United Nations, the U.S., South Korea, Japan, and China have surrounded the North with sensors that can detect radioactive isotopes, as well as so-called noble gases before they decay. The ratio of noble gases, xenon-131 and 133, can offer a clue about the design of a bomb. But the North Korean site does not seem to leak very much.
The South Koreans detected a little bit of xenon-133, but not that much, and they didn't detect any other isotopes.
Physicist and former arms control inspector David Albright is president of the Institute for Science and International Security.
Not what you'd expect from a large yield weapon. So they're doing something, and it is an ideal test site location. The explosion is sealing the material inside.
But the North Koreans do share some tidbits about what their weapons might look like, or so it seems.
They've actually shown us, what are presumed to be photographs of their nuclear devices. And they've shown that over the last few years' time frame. This was 2 weeks after the first nuclear test.
Nuclear physicist Sig Hecker is with the Center for International Security and Cooperation at Stanford University. He ran the Los Alamos National Laboratory from 1986 through 1997 and has visited North Korea 7 times.
This was 2007 in one of their uranium processing laboratories. My colleague
He
John
believes the
Lewis-
first weapon they tested was akin to Fat Man, the bomb that the U.S. dropped on Nagasaki. In it, high explosives implode a plutonium core, causing an instant nuclear chain reaction, or explosion. North Korea's first test in 2006 was an apparent failure, but in 2009, test number 2 was a success. Since then, the yields have grown steadily larger, and that leads experts to believe the North Koreans have developed a so-called boosted fission bomb.
The boosted bomb is one where you take highly-enriched uranium or plutonium and you actually put the fusion fuel inside to sort of help light more of the plutonium or highly enriched uranium.
Britain fires its first H-bomb.
In 1957, Great Britain tested a one-stage boosted thermonuclear bomb. Its yield, 720 kilotons, or about 50 Hiroshima bombs.
The trouble with them is as you increase the yield, it gets bigger and bigger in diameter, and it uses an incredible amount of weapon-grade uranium. And so all the countries are motivated to go to the two-stage weapon.
This is a 3D model of North Korea's thermonuclear weapon. They released a series of pictures and we were able to assess its size.
A two-stage, or hydrogen bomb, allows for a much larger yield in a smaller, lighter package. It begins with a plutonium or highly enriched uranium explosion, stage 1. That creates enough energy to squeeze hydrogen and its isotopes, causing fusion, stage 2. The U.S. tested more than 100 hydrogen bombs in the Pacific. The largest was 15 megatons, or 15,000 kilotons, more than 1,000 Hiroshima bombs. After the last North Korean test, the regime released a picture of what looks like a two-stage device.
It looks as if this last test, the yield, the explosive yield of that is large enough that it was most likely a two-stage bomb.
But are these weapons small, light, and robust enough to be efficiently delivered on a missile? The experts believe the North Koreans have designed their bombs with all of this in mind from the outset.
The first bomb was mostly, I think they had to prove to themselves, essentially a proof of principle that they can actually make, a fission bomb. And from that point on, they were determined towards making that bomb deliverable.
So they've had to spend time, I think, working on getting the yield up and not increasing the size too much. And I think that they've done.
So it is likely the North Koreans have bombs small enough to be delivered on short-range missiles. But weapons that are mounted on medium-range or intercontinental ballistic missiles are a much bigger challenge.
They have to be smaller, they have to be lighter, they have to be even more robust. They haven't demonstrated that they can do that.
And what about the missiles themselves? What can they deliver and where? The rocket science in our next report. I'm Miles O'Brien for the PBS NewsHour.
One of the country's most significant evangelical voices and religious leaders of the past century died today. Billy Graham, who preached to hundreds of millions of people around the world over decades and was a counselor to presidents, died at the age of 99. Hari Srinivasan returns with this look back at his life.
And God warns every man and every woman and every boy outside of Jesus Christ to prepare to meet Almighty God.
Billy Graham, the evangelist who became known as America's pastor, first attracted national notice in 1949 when thousands flocked to his revival meetings in Los Angeles.
No prophet ever stood up and said, I forgive your sins, but Jesus did.
The scene was repeated again and again over the next half-century as the faithful thronged events dubbed crusades.
Welcome to Madison Square Garden.
His were the first religious services to be televised nationally, raising millions of dollars that helped spread his brand of evangelism.
Wherever you are, God is giving you an opportunity once again
Billy Graham was born on a dairy farm in North Carolina in 1918 to Presbyterian parents. He began preaching while attending Florida Bible College, and a few years later in Illinois, he met his wife Ruth Bell. Their marriage lasted 64 years until her death in 2007. During the tumultuous early days of the civil rights movement, Graham demanded his audiences be physically integrated, once removing a rope barrier that separated the worshipers by color.
When God looks at you, he doesn't look on the outward appearance. The Bible says he looks upon the heart.
And he carried his message of peace and equality to millions around the world, traveling to 185 countries.
At Sydney Airport, evangelist Dr. Billy Graham arrives to begin an Australia-wide crusade.
Over the years, Graham ministered to popular world leaders, as well as those reviled by many, such as North Korea's Kim Il-sung. Though a lifelong Democrat, he said he never favored one party over the other, and that gave him credibility with both Democratic and Republican presidents.
If I said things publicly and preached to the president from some pulpit somewhere, I'd never get another opportunity to talk to them privately.
In 1991, as the first Gulf War got underway, Graham was in the White House with President George H.W. Bush and his family.
And I turned to her and I said, "Barbara," I said, "is this the beginning of the war?" And she didn't say anything, but I could sense by the way she looked that she knew something that I didn't know, that this was the beginning.
But his relationship with the powerful also drew criticism. In 2002, tapes recorded in the Nixon White House revealed a conversation between Graham and President Nixon in which both made disparaging remarks about Jewish people. Graham apologized. In his later years, he said he was less concerned with political matters and more with spirituality.
You say, why do you ask people to come forward? Because every person Jesus called in the New Testament, he called publicly.
Millions of ordinary Americans also felt personally connected with Graham through his regular television appearances, as when he consoled the nation after the attacks of September 11th.
As a Christian, I have hope not just for this life, but for heaven and the life to come. There is hope for eternal life, for Christ has conquered evil and death and hell. Yes, there's hope.
Graham continued his crusades late into life, drawing thousands to his final one in New York City in June 2005.
I want to say it's great to be back in New York.
At the 2007 dedication of his library in Charlotte, North Carolina, followers, friends, family, and 3 former presidents paid tribute.
He was the first evangelist of any stature that penetrated the Iron Curtain.
In a 1992 interview on the NewsHour, Graham offered his own explanation of his enduring appeal.
It took me a long time to learn that there are certain elements true in every audience I speak to. There's always those people who are lonely. There's a sense of guilt. And then there's also a fear of death. It's unconscious maybe, but it's there. And those are elements that one can touch on and speak to in the services. And I try to bring that into every sermon that I preach, that Christ is the answer. He's the hope.
The Reverend Billy Graham lived out his final years at his longtime home in Montreat, North Carolina, outside Asheville.
And for more on the life of Billy Graham and his influence, we turn to Randall Balmer, a historian and professor of religion at Dartmouth College. He is the author of numerous books on American religion, including Evangelicalism in America, and producer of the PBS documentary Crusade, The Life of Billy Graham. So tell me, what's the legacy of Billy Graham going to be?
I think he will go down in history as certainly the towering religious figure of the 20th century. Certainly in American religion, I suppose some people would argue that various popes might contend for that. But I think he's also very important for 2 reasons. First of all, he brought evangelicalism out of the shadows in the middle of the 20th century. In the early decades of the 20th century, evangelicals were feeling quite battered, and as though the larger culture had turned against them. And Billy Graham, beginning around 1949, 1950, begins to bring them into the public spotlight and begins to make evangelicalism acceptable to a larger public. Part of that had to do with his personality, the force of his personality, but part of it was that he used media quite successfully and brilliantly in many ways to bring that message to the larger public. I think that the second legacy of Billy Graham is, and this is really quite remarkable, that over the course of a career that spanned more than half a century, he was never seriously charged with any scandal. It's not to say he didn't misstep from time to time, he certainly didn't. But comparison with other televangelists, for example, Billy Graham emerged with his integrity and his character intact.
You know, you mentioned that he largely lived scandal-free. One of the few things that we mentioned in the obituary was the recorded conversations that he had with President Nixon, which he later apologized for in siding with some of the anti-Semitic views that the president had held.
He did, and I think Mr. Graham was genuinely shocked by this, and because he had no recollection of the conversation. Richard Nixon had a way of kind of pulling people into his orbit and into the maw of his dark personality, I think, in some ways. That's not to excuse Mr. Graham at all. I think what he said was unforgivable, as he acknowledged, but it's one of the dark marks on his life and on his career, yes.
Do you think that he was aware of how politically powerful evangelicalism had become in America, or has become in America?
He was, and he was not happy about that. When the religious right emerged in the late 1970s in opposition to desegregation, Billy Graham was uneasy about that, and he made several statements to the fact that he was afraid that those on the far right would try to co-opt evangelicalism for their political ends, and he was not happy about that.
And you also bring up the important point that he did this barnstorming and evangelizing in an era pre-YouTube. You know, in an era unlike the evangelical ministers that we see today, who are using television and the internet to reach these wide audiences. He actually physically went to all these countries.
He did. He was a very peripatetic evangelist, and but he used media along the way in order to amplify his influence and to make himself really into a religious celebrity in the 20th century.
Do you think that there is an heir apparent to, is anybody doing what Billy Graham was able to do, or is that even possible in this era?
I don't think so. I think there really will be only one Billy Graham. And I say that because I think he came to prominence at a unique moment in history when there are various new media technologies reaching the public. Radio had been around for several years, certainly, and other evangelists had used radio, but Graham seized on television. He seized on publication with his magazine, The Hour of Decision, or Decision Magazine, rather. And he exploited media brilliantly in order to make himself into a household name. And as I said earlier, a religious celebrity, probably without peer in the 20th century.
All right. Randall Balmer, Dartmouth College. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
And a news update before we go. The sheriff in Florida's Broward County says that deputies will begin to carry rifles on school grounds throughout the county, the site of the deadly shooting in Parkland. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Judy Woodruff. Join us online and again right here tomorrow evening. For all of us at the PBS NewsHour, thank you, and we'll see you soon.
You're watching PBS.